Welcome, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast, the Zoom edition. So not only are we, SJ and I, going about our regular podcasting business, recording this via audio, but this is also available on video. And so there'll be a lot of reasons for that maybe we can explain, but just trying some new things, right, in 2021. And so, yeah.
We're exploring more in the Exploring More podcast.
That's right. That's exactly right. And there you hear, if you're joining us just audio, then you know that there's some other folks in the studio with us or in these rooms as we're working through Zoom and recording. So Sherry Jennings and Robin Thompson are hanging out with SJ and I, because what we're talking about in this Exploring More podcast series is looks like a two-parter. That's what we're shooting for on marriage, particularly on the Rendezvous project. That is I said earlier, it's kind of in the birthing process. It's in contractions now. It is just about to be released next month, and so we thought it would be really good for us to revisit some things, talk about the state of marriage, what makes this different, why we did it, and how you can get your hands on it, how you can get your hearts on it, and all that good stuff. So welcome to the Exploring More podcast series on the Rendezvous project with the Jennings and the Thompsons, and I'd love to just kick it off, you guys, with what's your sense? What's your sense about marriage right now? 2020, COVID. I looked up some things and have some statistics, but just what's your feel? What's your thoughts about the conditions of marriage today?
Yeah, I think because of the pandemic, Michael, and shutdowns and people, working from home, if you have stuff going on in your marriage, problems going on in your marriage, proximity tends to exacerbate those problems. And there's a truth to the idea that, if you work 8 or 9 hours a day and you go to different offices, work in different places, maybe you're whatever your profession might be, including, a stay-at-home dad or a stay-at-home mom, that's a profession in my mind. There's a truth that, when you're apart for 8 or 9, 10 hours a day, it tends to be easier to avoid the problems that really need to be talked about. And so when you're forced to be home all day, every day, those problems tend to be unavoidable. And I would add to that, most folks, and I would include ourselves in that list of folks, at one time, we didn't know how to deal with them.
Right. And
so we tried to run away from each other. But when you're on lockdown or on quarantine, you can only run so far. Mm-hmm. So, especially
driveway.
Yeah. I mean, you can go out in the driveway. I'm just going to go sit in the car in the garage for a couple hours. I mean, that kind of idea to get away from each other. But so, yeah, I think, and just the empirical evidence, from speaking to friends of mine who are in ministry. I had one guy share with me the other day that he's got 4 of his friends he's been friends with for a long time, whose marriages are imploding right now. 4 of them.
On the divorce train. Yeah. I know who we're talking about. That's right.
Yeah, because I think about, if we were forced to be home, if we were quarantining in the best of times and you can't, I guess, quarantine in the best of times, but I mean, it's in the midst of stress-inducing uncertainty, not knowing what tomorrow's going to look like, how long this is going to last, feelings about masks and gathering limitations and all of that. That stirs something up in you. and in Scott. So, how do we each individually walk through those stresses and concerns and what it's bumping into and just all of it? And then, like you said, we're home together all the time, which sounds ideal, right? To be with the one that, chose me, I chose.
When things are going well, that is ideal, right? But that's not always the case, right? So, it can be trying. I can't think of we've been together since, including dating and marriage and all of our story since 1989. And I can't think of a time in that period of time, 30 plus years, that there was more of a environment that invited you to be triggered by things, politically, the pandemic. I mean, there's just so much that's up in our faces all the time, and we don't always feel the same way about those things. Mm-hmm. And even if we feel the same way about those things, we might respond to them differently. So, Sherry's response might be different than mine. So there's just, when you have two objects that are close together, whether they be, two rocks or whatever they are, two people, they tend to grind against each other, right? and create that friction. And so we're just in an environment right now, I think, Michael, that there's a greater opportunity for friction. Now, that's not to say it's all negative, right? There's a greater opportunity for growth from a certain perspective that way too.
Yeah. Anything to add? Thoughts on that?
I agree wholeheartedly. I think what this year has revealed in me, there's some unhealth. I've seen my own codependency, my own lack of healthy boundaries more so this past year than I ever have before. I didn't even really know that I had tendencies towards codependency and struggle with healthy boundaries, especially with our daughters. And we've had daughters home, and how that has impacted our marriage. And so it's been revealing in our styles of relating, because we're together all the time. So I feel like the good is accentuated, and the things that we are challenged with, and that we, the invitation to more, and the invitation to healing and exploration and curiosity and these things, that has also been more challenging. And how do we engage that individually and together, I think is the invitation. Has been for us.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's funny because I've got Wall Street Journal, I've got BBC, I've got AARP. I've got a lot of things that in direction I can go and share. But you don't have to have a giant survey of 3,000 marriages. You can look and feel and explore your own. And I would say what you guys have said is pretty true. I mean, that's what the findings also say. And so the state of marriage, it's already a volatile space. And every marriage goes through social challenges, economic challenges, styles of relating, your children and what they're going through and how that affects you. So what I think is one of the observations that's pretty easy to make, but let me just make it for everyone, is this, that all marriages go through challenges and crisis and have their relationship in some way stressed or strained or battered by circumstances. When you take a world that has to go through that all at the same time to some degree. And like you said, SJ, COVID was clearly one major thing in the last, here we are in late January, and this was in early February, this was March. So we're coming up on that year and of absolute disruption and that led to all the things you were saying about loss of jobs, incomes, stress, anxiety, fear, all the depression, all those things. It wouldn't be any surprise to anyone with the political climate, the social climate, the economic climate, and then the pandemic, all of that in a tornado, hurricane, tsunami, of natural disaster type ingredients come into your marriage somehow, some way. I mean, and then what it brings up, right? As has been said, it tests things and it tries things. And we believe, the four of us and the Zoe team, that there's an enemy that's at work as well. So let's not bring that up, that there is an enemy that comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And there's a narrative that we get our perspective about marriage from what God created and how the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And so if marriage can be one of the most powerful things, a man and a woman walking with God together, which is the underscore, right? The subtitle of the Rendezvous Project, then there you go. What is violently opposed and how challenging it can be to survive such ingredients thrown together, thrown at you as a couple. So, the state of marriage to take its pulse and temperature, right, is you can look at your own and it's been a time to do that, but also, what's going on in the landscape. So it would not surprise anyone, right, that counseling appointments across the globe for marriages is up 30%.
Yeah, you can't find, we've had people in our family, not to name names, in our own family that cannot find a counselor, cannot find a psychiatrist. Their jobs they're booked, forever be secure.
Yeah.
Good for them, but yet.
So what about
shows the amount of trauma and stress and
just to throw this idea, what if you're married to one of those counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists?
That brings its own set
we tend to think of them as the experts in help. They're in this thing too. Mm-hmm. They're having to go through this too. So there's a strain and a stress on their profession. They're in it because they want to help. And to be booked solid into people's problems and challenges and their crisis and to not bring that home, I mean, it takes a toll. I mean, the work that we do, what we get to do and love to do, helping people walk with God, hearing their story, engaging, it has an effect on us. And it's an invitation to really look at that in the marriage context. So yeah, those were just some of the things that I wanted us to. So we're answering a little bit why a marriage resource. And when we started this 18 months ago, COVID was not on the landscape. We knew that marriages are in trouble in and of themselves and are literally under attack. Because love is under attack. It's just what we want. It's why we wanted to create this. And we'll get into that a little bit more in just a minute. I think one of the most challenging statistics I found was New York, DC. There was a survey done about law firms that specialize in divorce. October 19 and October 20, the comparison between
2019 and 2020.
Yeah, October, 2019 and mm-hmm. October 2020, 70% more caseloads in 2020 October. Mm. 70% more filings. Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, it's to me that doesn't explain why, but it clearly shows yes, this is taking a toll on relationships, right? On marriage. I mean, there were statistics on intimacy or the lack thereof. There were statistics on isolation and communication. There were statistics on medications, and obviously all the things that you would just kind of think would come along side of this. But the one that I found that was really, really actually more encouraging, there was an overwhelming large amount, percentage-wise, of couples surveyed that felt like COVID strengthened their marriage. That during COVID, they were almost 80% in this particular survey.
Yep. I think there can be a tendency to, as I said at the beginning, exacerbate the issues. But there can also be okay, we're going to face this together. There's a binding together and a working together to face a common enemy, whether that enemy be job loss or illness or children at home, right? Having to do homeschool, God bless those folks that have to, walk their kids through a Zoom classroom environment. There are challenges, but there are also opportunities to affirm the idea that you're in this together. And I think part of what we're proposing, Michael, is, rather than in the physical realm, we've talked about the physical realm and the spiritual realm often on this podcast. But rather than facing challenges together and conquering them together only in the physical realm, part of what we want to propose is that couples can do that in the context of the spiritual realm as well.
Yeah, which leads me to say this, that, we believe that in marriage, there's Robin's true self and her false self. And there's my true self and my false self. And they can be pretty tangled up, actually, in a person's story. So part of the Rendezvous project was to point at that. So we've said this in the Rendezvous project, and we say it in some of the other things we've written and shared, SJ, that I wonder how many people have divorced their spouse's false self. Right? Yeah. I have a theory that, that opposites attract, then they repel, and then they have that chance to become something great. But those first months that you're dating, right? Those first months that you're dating, people tend to want to contribute that to some kind of, your best foot forward. I think, honestly, you guys, I think that's your true self. Your best foot forward would be your ability to listen, to not judge, to forgive, to be kind, to give the benefit of the doubt. That's actually you're seeing yourself, one another's true selves. This is my theory. And then what happens is it gives way to this other creature.
Well, I think it has to do with motivation, Michael. I think in the beginning parts of a relationship, we're operating from that place, and it's it's through a veil darkly a little bit, a glimpse of your true self, to your point. But I think it really comes down to motivation. And some of our motivation in the beginning of a relationship is not necessarily, what it would be later on in a relationship. So I love that idea that we get this taste, this glimpse of, if we can look back to the early part of our relationship, before all the stuff comes along, before all the wounds, the vows, and the agreements that have happened to us as people before we met each other, that we're bringing into the relationship. But then the ones we also inflict on one another, before all that taints that idea that you're proposing, right? We can go back to that and experience a little bit of that. If we can remember what that felt like. Yeah. And then there's a way, what we're proposing with this resource, there's a way, there's a journey that can be taken as individuals and as a couple to move towards more of true self-living, is the way we would describe it. But it's not based out of a place of, the motivation is, well, I just want to, win me a wife or get me a husband. Yeah. What the motivation is different, right? I want to truly know, I want to truly be intimate with my spouse. And I want to be honestly, truly more intimate with myself and understand who I really am and what my motivations are.
Yeah. Sherry, before you roll, I want to hear that. I want to hear you go on. The motivation piece, I want to take that a little bit deeper, because what can be falsely assigned as self-centeredness early in a relationship is actually what I find to be more true is I want to be loved. That's at our core. I want to be loved. I want to be seen. I want to be wanted. I want to be known.
Yeah.
That ingredient, that motivation isn't wrong. It just has to be seen.
And you have to be aware of it.
For what it is. And I want to offer that to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know someone. So yeah, that's a whole bag that maybe we need to bring the team in on some of that for maybe sessions 3 and 4, the motivations behind the motivations and seeing that. Sherry,
and I like the words desire and delight, even better than motivations.
Yeah.
You know, that we were designed to have those.
Made for intimacy.
Yeah. Yeah. To long to be seen and to be known and to be delighted in, and for mutual honor and delight. So yeah.
Sherry.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were talking, I hadn't thought about the idea that was likely our truest self in those early stages, because I can't help but think when Scott and I first met, how much he enjoyed the whole idea of, hey, let's see where this road goes. And hey, I've never been down this road. And the exploration, the desire to move in different spaces and the freedom to just explore and see what we find there, and how endearing I thought that was then, and how much I enjoyed it. And it invited my truest self into the exploration, into the freedom of spontaneity and, choosing a different path, and it's okay if you're late. And then seeing through our marriage where my false self came in and shut that down, that being on time was more important, that all that exploring was a waste of time. And so, like you said, coming back around in later years where I love that. I love exploring with him. I love that was so attractive then. And it's our true selves awakening again. It's the dismantling of the false self that prioritized being on time. And this is so much better. This truer self, this exploring now.
Something to ponder for sure. How does that, and you guys in the Rendezvous project, and one of the things that has been so amazing about your story to Jennings was you did get divorced.
Our false selves did divorce each other,
and then began this relationship with God, and then reformed and refashioned the relationship with each other, which we want to talk about some more in just a minute. So before we leave this, I think that I'm going to make up a statistic, SJs and Robin. I'm going to make it up. So just know that this is qualified by no other than me.
Well, 99% of all statistics are made up anyway. So
just like that
makes me feel good. So listeners, here's the deal. I believe somewhere between 70 and 80% of all couples who get divorced do not go through counseling prior to divorce.
Yeah, I don't know what the statistic is, but I mean that sounds absolutely true. I think it's probably even higher than that.
Or get bad counseling.
Yeah,
we got bad counseling.
Man, that's huge.
we got bad
That's
counseling.
another percentage that you can make up. 90% of couples get bad counseling. Why I say that is we know a couple marriages right now that, man, if your car's broke, you take it in. If your appliance is broke, you call somebody. You spend money to do that. We know a couple couples that are not. Right now, we have offered counsel and they're not taking advantage. And I think about that just grieves me.
Yeah.
It's one reason among many of why we created the Rendezvous Project. What if a couple could go through this video series and these 12 sessions, and just them. Now they might watch it, like this, back to back and separate, and but I mean, at least it would be the kind of counsel, especially with the way virtual counseling and video and Zoom and counselors, that's the way the world has moved to meetings and conversations and assembling. what would it look like to do that, virtually? So I believe that is a, what, as just a resource for counsel, we would take couples through this very session. We would take couples through this, and we have. That's some of the Rendezvous history that we'll talk about after the break.
Yeah. And if I can just speak to that for a second, Michael, I've watched you over the years in the context of the other main resource that we are offering right now, which is the Heart of a Warrior book and the Heart of a Warrior Encounter weekends. And when men come up to you and say, hey man, I need help, I need counseling, I got this going on, when it's more related to them as an individual, I've heard you say, come to the weekend, read the book, because in that weekend and in that book, you're going to get more counseling than I could provide in a year's worth of sessions. And so the same concept would hold true for the Rendezvous Project. If we're going to sit down with you as a couple and maybe give some counsel, then I would say watch the Rendezvous Project first, or watch a session, and then we can talk about that session during our weekly meeting. So yeah, it's really set up to operate that way.
Okay, so let's take a break, and we'll be right back, because that's where we want to go. We want to explore more about that, share more about that, because there's some really important reasons why we created this, and I think SJ, you've started us to turn that corner. So we'll be right back with the Exploring More podcast, looking at the Rendezvous Project in marriage in just a minute. Welcome back to the Rendezvous Project special Zoom edition Exploring More podcast. Before the break, SJ, you stepped us into that lane, which I think is so, why do we make it? And I think let's start with some history. We created the Rendezvous Project back in 2007. Was the first marriage weekend. Our friend Gary Barkalow and Lee, and just like a lot of things, we were kind of building it as we were flying it, building it as we were paddling it, and it leaked, and still are truly. but to something you said before the break, SJ, because we were doing conferences with men and for men's hearts primarily at that time, there was this constant request, hey, how do I take this home? How do I do this in my marriage? How do I get my wife to step into this with me? And I love what you said. Well, our answer across the board was, well, first you need to get your heart back. First, you need to get things out of the way that are in the way of you being your true self. We would say that to men.
Yeah. Let me interrupt. If you're not sure, listeners, what that means, get your heart back, and we go back and listen to the 149 episodes that preceded this one, Exploring the podcast, and you can.
That's all you need to do.
But the point I would say, yeah, SJ, where I heard that enough that I only came home to Robin one time and said, would you do this with me? Could we do some of the things that we're doing in two different conferences, men and women, and could we bring those together in the wrapping of marriage, and in the idea of two people walking with God together? And so a lot of alumni those first years, it was a lot of alumni from our events bringing their spouse, maybe who hadn't been. That was a big part of the beginnings of creating an environment it was small, 10, 12, 13 couples, beach houses or mountain houses, kind of it was a real retreat like that. But what do you remember about the history of the Rendezvous and just remembering its beginnings? And
Well, as I was remembering, I took it even back a step further and was remembering when you and I were engaged, and we were coming on staff at the time of a large organization. And we would meet with people to talk about joining our team. And so we sat with a lot of married couples. I remember over the span of 6 to 8 months. and friends and family, and just a lot of married couples. And I remember it seemed like so often as they would ask us how we met and our story, and we would talk very excitedly about getting married and our future. And I just remember so often they would kind of look at each other. I remember kind of sharing this knowing look and kind of this smile that now seems a little bit, or not now, at the time it was like this smirk. And they would say something along the lines of, we remember stepping into marriage so naively and thinking that everything was going to be great and this was going to be so perfect and so good, the best thing ever. And then reality sets in, and it just felt like they were mocking our hope almost, and our belief that this was going to be so good. And I just remember that even if not everybody said it in those words, I had that feeling more often than not. And it just made such an impression on me and never left me. And I truly wish we had someone say to us, to speak to us, you were made for relationship. You were made for intimacy with God and with each other.
Yeah.
You were meant to experience connection and play and safety and delight together. And you were meant to have and to cultivate delight and honor for one another. And that they could even say, marriage is hard. Marriage is messy. It is, you are broken people coming together, but there's beauty and there's the potential for beauty and goodness, and it has the potential and the invitation to bring joy and transformation as we engage each other in a way where growth can take place. I wish someone had spoken that over us,
Even as you say that now, if somebody had, Scott and Sherry, if somebody had, I know we'd have been on the edge of our seat going, would you help us?
Yeah.
Would you adopt us?
Yeah.
But
to know that was
that somebody felt that way,
and
that somebody had felt that way because they had journeyed that way,
right,
and that's what their experience was. So
that's a whole, we could do a whole other podcast series on just, and not even just in the context of marriage, but as Christians, we have intimacy and relationship with Jesus. We have the answer. We have the answer to the issues that we are facing ourselves and that people are facing. We have the answer. And so then why, as Christians, do we sit down with a young couple who's getting ready to get married and say, oh, just wait until you're 6 months in, and he's leaving his underwear on the floor, and come back and talk to us then. I mean, I get why you might go there, but really we have the answer. We have the hope. And so there's a truth, Robin, that there's an atmosphere of that even amongst Christian believers, and there's an atmosphere of just because we've experienced maybe some difficulty, it's almost like Christians forget the hope that's available to us, in the context of our marriage, in the context of our lives. I think hope, paired with reality also is helpful, right? But really, to your point, Robin, where's the celebration? Where's the excitement? Where's the affirmation that you're made for relationship? Where that God wants, that marriage is God's design for union on the planet, union in earth, on the earth. And he's designed it to be that way. So I'm with you on that. Obviously it fires me right up when
so back to history. We did a
number of years in counseling,
because I think that I think you guys have some important things to contribute when we were talking about your history with us and engagement. I mean, we all went through some other resources at
Yeah.
times that had their place and had their time. I mean, family life and their marriage conferences. That was a huge part of helping us kind of recover some foundational things. And I think they've done a good job over the years. We'll talk about how the Rendezvous Project's a little bit different in a little bit, but and I do think about our counseling, and like you said, I like that you went way back, Robin. I mean, you know, we bring our parents' marriage into marriage.
Mm-hmm.
We bring the cultural iconic and what that we bring so much down the aisle with us. And from our marriage counseling in '89 to some of the other resources that we the love languages, even during our marriage, the love. There is a glaring absence of teaching on warfare in marriage.
Yeah, and just for the listeners' benefits, that doesn't include, you know, someone wielding a frying pan. That's not the warfare we're talking about, right? We're talking about spiritual
opposition to your heart, my heart, and now the enemy brings these things in, and they actually have more to work with. If God has more to work with in two people coming together and what they make in their coming together, well, the enemy tries to subvert that and do what they do. But the stories that we bring in and the stories that we become, you know, that's a big part of the Rendezvous Project, what we want to focus on. And we'll talk about that some more. We have to talk about that some more in a minute. But history, could you guys just share a little bit about your history with the project and with the weekend, and then even more recent history would be good too.
Yeah, sure. We so one of the things about the Rendezvous Project is it's a 12-session series, but we also have bonus materials in there too. One of the we've got a whole session on sexual intimacy and some other things, but the longer version of our story and what led us to the place where we divorced and then got remarried is explored a little bit further in a bonus material in the Rendezvous Project. But just to sum it up, Michael, we got married really young and did not get any kind of counseling, formal counseling, other than, to your point a little bit earlier, what we learned from our own parents in terms of how to be married and what to expect. And those weren't necessarily intentionally taught. They were just, we observed our parents. Mm-hmm. So I think we brought a lot into that, a lot of that into our relationship. And so we got married September 21st, 1991, and got divorced September 21st, 2005, 14 years later. And it was really because we were both completely disoriented. The false self in both of us was ruling our lives, and that led to a path of death and destruction, really. But you know, God's a great redeemer, and so brought us to a place at the foot of the cross where we were rescued by Jesus, and He showed us a path to come back together. It took about 1.5 years before we got remarried again, of counseling and exploration and conversations, pursuing intimacy with God and one another. And then even after we got remarried, continuing that journey. Mm-hmm. But He led us to a place of being able to share our story very transparently in the context of a church setting. Mm-hmm. And immediately following that, after we shared our story, we had a couple come up to us and say, "No, we are nowhere near as messed up as the two of you were. So there must be hope for us too." And that led us to a cup of coffee with them. And then that led us to a place of a lay leader position at the church, leading the marriage ministry, seeking and acquiring counseling training, and then becoming counselors at the church for marriages. Yeah. And then we found Zoe, shortly. They're right in that area too. I think I went to my first event at Zoe and the Heart of a Warrior Encounter in 2008.
Yeah. And Sherry, you hit
our first Rendezvous in 2013.
Sherry, you went to a women's weekend.
I did. I went to several.
So I mean, we've all sat in the seats, right? We've all sat in the seats of others sharing, teaching, inviting us into the larger story, the way of the heart, and the redemption of things in our stories. And so 2013 is when you stepped into one of those earlier Rendezvous. Was it in the mountains? Was it in the?
It's in the mountain houses.
Yeah, the mountain houses up near Boone and Blowing Rock. Yeah. And
it was so beautiful, the intimacy of it. Like you'd said, the fewer couples. It was probably only 10 or 12 couples. And just watching the guide team, the couples, you two and the Andretians and the Barcalos, and the way you moved together in these conversations and what you offered was completely different than what we had been experiencing in other marriage conferences. But I think most impactful, what spoke to my heart the most, was the intentionality, the time set aside for us to sit together and for Scott to tell me his story, for Scott to share his story, and for me to listen, not offer anything, but just listen and hear his heart, hear what he was exploring, what he experienced. And, you know, you might think, well, what could he tell me that we hadn't already talked about? But there's so much just in what he'd been exploring through the Heart of a Warrior. It was so beautifully intimate, just sitting there listening and hearing him tell his story. And then, you know, the other way around, I got to share my story and he got to listen. And through the weekend, I mean, that set the stage for such intimacy with God and with each other.
And even as you share that, Sherry, I think now that was 7+ years ago, going on 8. And God has, as we've continued the journey, God has just revealed more in our own stories that we didn't even consciously aware of back then, you know? So,
yeah. So I want to talk about in the next episode, I want to talk more about the construction of the Rendezvous Project, that huge ingredient story, and how the Rendezvous Project longs to start that conversation between two couples. I mean, really, when you think about it, how much of your spouse's story do you know? Their girlhood, their boyhood, their teenage years. I mean, you might have met them as teenagers, you might have known them in grade school, but oh my gosh, you know, we kind of, most of us, it's later that we met, maybe in our 20s, and there's a lot of life and story back there. So in the next episode, I want to start looking at the ingredients of the Rendezvous Project and focus a little bit more on the importance of that. And I love what you said, Sherry, the time to, you know, this resource is more than just the video, watching the video. It's what the video, each one is there to do for the conversation that a couple can have, whether it's in a small group, Lord willing, small groups in the world can come back, or you know, people use it as a resource for maybe they take some couples and do what we did for these years, and they go to the mountains, they go to the beach, they go somewhere to the lake, they go somewhere special, and they do this together. You know, push play, watch, and then take the instructions and go enter into. I mean, that's what we did. We wanted to take the weekend project and give it away in a way that more couples could experience this than the number of retreats we could hold, even in a year, full time. You know, just so. Can you, SJ, before we break, can you just and close this episode? Can you share a little bit about where people can go, what they can do to find out some information, and then we'll wrap up and save the rest for next session.
Yeah, the best thing to do, Michael, is go to the rendezvousproject.com. I mean, everything's located there. You can find out more about the project. There's some short videos on there, some clips from the project itself with a couple interviews. We actually interviewed some couples who were attending at the time and got some of their input and some of their stories too. So all of the information is there. And I think one of the most important things that you can find there is a Rendezvous Project prayer. So if you're interested in the Rendezvous Project, if you want to help us, support us in this effort to reclaim marriages and help God to bring people back together, just pray that prayer with us, listeners. That'd be great.
Yeah. So hey, thank you guys. We'll do another episode on this because there's a lot more to talk about. But just honored to be doing this with you. I love the Rendezvous Project, what we're offering, and yeah. So we until next time, continue to explore with God the more, because with God there's always more. And so thank you, friends and allies. We'll see you next time on the Exploring More podcast.